let me say that Marxism is not a theory about existing socialist societies, preponderantly. The corpus of Marxist theory is about something else. The amount of Marxist writings about existing social societies is very small. About what socialism would look like, that theory is very underdeveloped, in fact, and I think in a way that practice went way ahead of theory in that respect. In many societies, we always hear that theory is all mapped out, but it doesn't, you never get it developed in practice. It's easy to spin a theory, but there's no practice. In fact, more often than not, it's the other way around, that there's often quite a bit of things happening, and the theory hasn't been developed to explain what's happening. Theory often is catching up to practice. And the Marxist theory about existing social societies is a very naive theory. It said that once you get rid of capitalism, once you heal certain contradictions and abuses and exploitations in society, and once you communalize the social production, people are going to act differently and people are going to be really happy, et cetera, et cetera. And that isn't quite what happened. Marxism, the other 90% of Marxism, is about capitalism. Marxism is a theory about capitalism. And it's a theory which says that capitalism has certain dynamics. Capitalism has a tendency to accumulate capital for the sake of accumulating capital. That's what Marxism says. Marxism says that capitalism is not a system about building jobs or building communities or creating work or creating a better standard of living. That capitalism will create jobs or destroy jobs depending on whether or not there's profit. It will create communities, Levittowns, whatever else, ticky-tack boxes, whatever else. It will create beautiful houses if there's someone who could pay beautiful prices. Or it will destroy communities, as it destroyed Poletown in Chicago to build a Cadillac plant. It will create jobs, or it will close out jobs through automation or through exporting those jobs to cheaper labor markets in Hong Kong or South Korea, whatever else. The capitalism is a dynamic that has very little to do with human needs. It's a dynamic that has to do with the maximization of profit. Its central imperative, the central law of capitalist motion and development, is the maximization of profit, is capital penetration for the sake of capital accumulation. And it will use the environment as a septic tank, not because people are nasty, not because they're stupid and anything else, but because that is rational. It's rational to do that. And that's the Marxist analysis of capitalism. And that's the difference between a liberal complaint and a radical analysis. Because the liberal will spend the rest of his life complaining about these things being wrong and saying, aren't we foolish? Aren't we irrational that we foul our environment in this way? When are we going to come to our senses? The implication always is that the person who's saying that is somehow morally better and nicer and would do differently than all the other silly, foolish, confused people around. And the Marxist analysis says, no, that isn't true. That the reason Firestone built that tire company plant on the Mill River in Connecticut and took a river that Mother Nature had spent 100 million years developing, that was used for recreation and fishing and drinking water, and Firestone dumped that raw industrial effusion into that water, wasn't because they were foolish, because they were confused or silly, but they were rational. Because their commitment wasn't to that river, it wasn't to the environment, it wasn't to children playing, it wasn't to future generations, it wasn't to the community, although they'll say that in their PR propaganda, as they're doing now with Earth Day. Exxon coming out with ads on Earth Day blows my mind. I say, where am I? 1984, or well, what is this? Exxon, we love the Earth too. Well, we've had a few little rough spots here or there, but we're with you on Earth Day. Because they had nothing to do with that. And that's a Marxist analysis. And the Marxist says it's quite rational to dump your raw industrial effusion into that river because that maximizes your profits. And the essence of that system is the maximization of profit, is capital accumulation. And every other human value is secondary and, in fact, possibly even antagonistic to that value, it doesn't matter, then those values shall be smashed. Sometimes some of them can be accommodated, if they can be accommodated within the parameters of profit. If not, then they have to go. So that's the difference, and that's what capital. Now, if you want to say that that analysis is no longer pertinent, because Lech Wałęsa has proven himself to be what I always knew he was, a right-wing capitalist admirer. If you want to say that, I don't get the connection. I don't see that at all. The liberal will say, look how foolish, how wasteful our military budget is. The Air Force builds an F-16 fighter plane, and the Navy Air Force builds an F-16 fighter plane, which is almost a duplicate. Total duplication, billions of dollars duplicated when we already had that weapon. Isn't that foolish and wasteful? And the Marxist analysis says, no, that's not foolish and wasteful. That's only foolish and wasteful from a human point of view, from the taxpayer's point of view, from the needs of your human community. But who the hell ever said capitalism had anything to do with the human community? If you think it does, just listen to George Bush and find out what has he ever been saying about the needs of the human community 2 years in office. It's not wasteful. It's wonderful. If you're a defense contractor, then it's wonderful to have a contract with the Navy and one with the Air Force, and you'll even go for one with the Marines and with the Seabees, and you'll try to sell the F-16 to the Coast Guard if you could do it, if you could get away with it. It's perfectly rational. And so you've got to decide, are you going to spend the rest of your life as a half-assed liberal complaining about the irrationalities and the foolishness of all these programs? That's all we ever hear in the media to the extent we get any criticisms of existing policy. Or are you going to point out the links of class power and class interest that are behind those things, that keep doing those things? Do you really think that because you don't know what they're doing, they don't know what they're doing? And that's why when someone says, how can you still be a Marxist? It's like someone saying to me, how can you still think there's a law of gravity? Don't you see we have an airplane now? How could I pretend that it's just foolish, or that I don't know why the U.S. is in El Salvador, or that they're in Central America because they're just got some ego thing? Or they're in Central America because they're chasing ghosts and they're all confused in their policy. It's very rational to be in Central America. You're in Central America because you have to keep the world safe for this global process of capital penetration and capital accumulation. And the countries you attack and go after are the ones which might take a revolutionary path, or not even so revolutionary. Arbenz in Guatemala wasn't a revolutionary. Goulart in Brazil wasn't a revolutionary. Sukarno in Indonesia wasn't a revolutionary. Allende in Chile wasn't a revolutionary. Mossadegh in Iran wasn't a revolutionary. The Greek premiers under Papandreou weren't revolutionaries when the fascist generals came in. But what they were populist nationalists. Noriega and the People's Democratic, the Democratic Revolutionary Party in Panama isn't a revolutionary party. It's a populist party. But it's a left military in Panama. It was. The People's Defense Force was. The Panamanian Defense Force was a left force. And they used to shake down the companies. Instead of nationalizing them, they shook them down. And then they took that money and built social programs. Panama had social welfare programs. It had Social Security. It had human services. They were developing it. By Central American standards, they were pretty good. And that has to be destroyed. And when it became clear that Noriega wasn't our man, but he was continuing in Torrijos' path, Torrijos, who was killed by the CIA, I charged them with that murder when his plane mysteriously blew up in midair, then Noriega had to go. But we're not in Panama to get Noriega. We got Noriega several months ago. But we're there and we've arrested thousands of trade union leaders and political leaders and intellectuals. Panama City University is being purged of left people. Other people are being rounded up. And now you could say, I don't understand why we're in Panama. I don't understand why we're in Central America. I don't understand why we did that in Indonesia. I don't understand why we back the wrong side all the time. It's not the wrong side. It's the wrong side from a human point of view. It's the wrong side from a point of view of social justice. But it's a correct side. That's correct policy. That's correct policy if your constituency is the Fortune 500. Then it's correct policy to go into those countries and keep them open for capital penetration and capital accumulation on your terms, where those resources are yours, where those markets are yours.